Hey everybody, welcome to Just the News. I am Carrie Sheffield, and we are excited to have our guest today. She is Miss Jenna Ellis. Jenna is a senior legal advisor to the Trump 2020 campaign. Welcome, Jenna.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Jenna, walk us through what's happening right now with the state of the campaign, with the Trump campaign. We saw that there were some shakeups. We saw that there was the COO who was in 2016. He's now come here in 2020. What's going on behind the scenes in terms of the shakeup?
Yeah, well, this isn't really a shakeup as much as it is just perfecting the system heading into the last 4 months of the campaign. We're having to adjust, of course, like everyone else with the coronavirus and making sure that we can still get the president out and in rallies. We're super excited for this weekend in New Hampshire. That's going to be an open outside rally, and just making sure that we can still get him out on the campaign trail, but also that we have the protections in place to make sure that people feel safe and comfortable coming out. And of course, that's their choice. And so a lot of people for the Tulsa rally, we had, just millions of people. I think it was over 20 million over the course of just one weekend tuned in on television. And that just shows the vast motivation behind this president. But then we also had thousands and thousands of people, Secret Service actually clocked in everyone who came through security at over 12,000 people there in Tulsa. So regardless of what you see in the fake news media, that was actually a phenomenal success, and we're looking forward to the next 4 months.
And so, yeah, on the Tulsa issue, we saw the numbers that you said that people clocked in, but then the numbers who actually showed up in the stadium, were there actually, can you clear this up? Because there's been a lot of, other media outlets who have said things. Just clear this up for us. Were there people who had booked tickets and then didn't show up? And could these potentially be liberals who were trying to, in some way, trying to hamper the president? Did that happen?
Yeah, and so in terms of the numbers, while the fire chief estimated, and that was an estimate, right, of about 6,000, 6,500, a Secret Service who actually has people come through and they do all of the bag checks and they walk people through security. That's a more accurate count, and that was right around 12,000. So that's really the accurate count. But in terms of tickets, the president has been very clear from all the way back to 2015 when we started the rallies that he's never going to charge for the rallies. This is something that is an American experience, and it's something that he just loves doing and putting on for all of the great supporters across the country. So we allow people to register, and that's a free event. So we always get more registrations than people that show up. And so just because you register and you provide that information, we're not necessarily counting you as someone that is going to have a reserved seat and show up. There are a lot of people throughout the course of rallies that show up that actually don't get inside because they have a reserved ticket, but that doesn't mean a reserved seat. So what happened in Tulsa was that a lot more people, and through some of the liberals who tried to create these fake tickets to just inflate the numbers, that actually happens in all the rallies, that people can go and reserve tickets through bogus emails or phone numbers, and we kick those out of the system by making sure that they're actually verified email addresses and phone numbers. And so that's actually happened well before Tulsa. So this was something that I think that the story got confused on purpose to try to make it seem like, because this was the first rally that had happened in 3 months, it was the first one after the coronavirus pandemic. And as we're moving toward hopefully the end of this, coming out of the extent of the crisis and the lockdown, and as we're moving forward heading into November, that was something that was manipulated and wasn't really compared to the facts of what we've already experienced over the last 4 years of Trump rallies. So I think it was a lot of much ado about nothing.
I've never heard that before, Jenna. What do you know about that? Much ado about nothing. Can we say Mueller report?
Yes, exactly.
So, Jenna, then in terms of, you're saying this happens quite a bit with the rallies. Walk us through, is there any legal recourse for people who are doing these fraudulent tickets? Is there any sort of possible legal action? I mean, you're a lawyer, you're a legal advisor, senior legal advisor to the campaign. What legally are there any tools that the campaign can use to prevent such a diversion of your resources?
Right. Well, the campaign, of course, takes our legal strategies very seriously, and what we choose to initiate, of course, is an internal contemplation in terms of whether we can doesn't necessarily mean that we will, or that it's a correct use of resources in terms of, we all have limited time, right? And so what the campaign has done is that we allow anyone to register, but we do go through and make sure to verify and check against a correct email address, a verified email address and cell phone number. And we allow anyone to register. And so we've never had any issue with supporters and people who want to register and who do intend to come to the rallies. They can go ahead and register, and then they show up. Even in my home state of Colorado, where we had a rally back in February before the coronavirus crisis peaked, really. There were some of my own friends who I encouraged, sign up and, come out to the rally. And, there was a friend of mine that, unfortunately for a family situation couldn't attend that day. And so she was one that had a registered ticket that ended up not showing up, but that didn't have any impact on the success of the rally. And so in terms of what our strategy is moving forward, we're going to continue to hold the rallies. We're going to continue to make the ticket sales free and accessible to everyone who wants to come. And then the actual seating is on a first come, first serve basis. So that's why you see people in line even days ahead, because they want to make sure that they get into the stadium, that they see the president, and that they participate in this rally. And it's been a really great system. And again, Tulsa was one, I think, that the mainstream media tried to confuse the issue, and they didn't really do, probably purposefully, right? They didn't want to highlight what we've always done for the rallies, what's gone before. They just wanted to make it seem like a failure so that they could try to pretend that there is a dampened motivation behind this president. And there absolutely isn't. We're just seeing, I was up in South Dakota with the president for that event. That was a packed arena. There were people even, who were on television monitors that couldn't even get into that particular amphitheater. They could see the fireworks, but they were watching it on television, and they still came out because they absolutely love and support President Trump, and they love and support America and everything about America first that he stands for.
Mm-hmm. And Jenna, is there, when you say reserve ticket versus reserve seat, is there an unlimited number of reserved tickets but not guaranteed seats, so that, i.e., the number of reservations would not sell out if, for example, as we reported, some liberals were advertising on a liberal Facebook page with 60,000 members, go ahead and get your ticket for the New Hampshire rally coming up on Saturday, even if you have no intention to come. Is there a finite number of reserved tickets?
Not to my knowledge. And again, I'm not on the ops side, in that great of detail, but to my knowledge, we have the reservations. That's why 1 million people were allowed to register for tickets, because we have that open and available. And we understand that, always more people are going to register than show up. And, if we changed it to a system where there's a finite number, this isn't like you're paying, $80 or $120 to go to see a Broadway show where you're going to pay so you're going to show up. This is a free event. So we open that, and that's unlimited, but you do have to register. But then the actual seating is on a first come, first serve basis for people who are in line, but they do have to have pre-registered in advance. And that's been a system that's worked, beautifully for us for the last 4 years. And for the next 4 months, we anticipate that as well.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of legally, again, are there issues legally that when you have saboteurs who are trying to obstruct the campaign, what are issues that you're dealing with right now? What's on your plate?
Yeah, so those types of things, while they're bothersome, we do have a process that we can confirm their identity, confirm, that it is a valid email address and phone number. And that's really the system that has worked well. In terms of the legal strategy, what we're the most focused on is making sure that we're protecting election integrity and protecting the ballot box. And so we have the Trump campaign, in connection with the RNC, has launched protectthevote.com, which is a website where you can see where we're fighting. And what the Democrats are trying to do is to manipulate the election system using the coronavirus as a pretext. And they're trying to remove safeguards and security from the election so that there's a wide opportunity for massive fraud. We've already seen that in a wide variety of instances across multiple states in prior elections, even just primaries and local elections that have happened this year, where there have been fraud in this mass mail-in ballot initiative that the Democrats are trying to promote. And so you have to ask yourself that question. If the Democrat Party are the only ones that don't care about free and fair elections, they don't care about safeguards and making sure to protect the sanctity of the ballot box, what does that really say about their psyche and about their contemplation for Joe Biden's possibility of winning? Well, they're probably running a little scared, right? Because if they have to lie, cheat, and steal to make sure that they win, then they're not so confident that they're going to win fairly. But we know that the Democrats always try to manipulate the rules for their preferred outcome, rather than go with our constitutional system, which provides that every eligible voter gets to vote and have their vote counted once. And that's what the Trump campaign and President Trump is dedicated to. And this is a nonpartisan issue where we should all agree that free and fair elections in a government system that is of the people, by the people, and for the people, where we, the people, get to select and prefer our representatives in government that are our fellow citizens, we should be able to rely on the sanctity and the security of our vote. And that's what the Democrats are trying to utterly destroy. So in terms
Jenna,
of the legal, that's what we're doing.
This issue of so-called ballot harvesting, there seems to be conflicting court rulings on this. Has the campaign considered escalating this to the Supreme Court to get clarity, to get some form of nationwide injunction, to get more very specific, very granular clarity about whether ballot harvesting, as it's called, is allowable?
Yeah, so we're definitely taking each of our cases one step at a time. And, if it ultimately ends up in the Supreme Court, then, that would be something I think that all of the American people would pay close attention to, so that we understand that this issue of ballot harvesting, when we're talking about that, that means that there's a breakdown in the chain of custody. And so if a ballot is mailed to an individual through the mail, and then they fill out their ballot, and then they give it to a third party to then go and return. And even if that third party happens to be a mail carrier, right, there are still documented instances where mail carriers have altered or destroyed ballots. And so that just breaks down the chain of custody rather than going and voting in person. And so, if we can stand in line and social distance and be safe at a grocery store or a hardware store, we can stand in line to vote. And of course, President Trump and the campaign certainly understands the need and the necessity for absentee voting. That's a system where you have to have those safeguards in place. And if that's the a way that you can participate in the vote, absolutely do that. But what we're trying to make sure that we prevent is that these election laws aren't just manipulated and changed hurriedly and in an unmonitored fashion like what the Democrats want. So we filed in multiple states. And again, if that ballot harvesting issue or the nationwide mail-in voting issue gets to the Supreme Court, then that would be great. But we're taking this, one step at a time. And the most recent suit we filed was in the Western District of Pennsylvania. But again, go to protectthevote.com and you can see everywhere that we're fighting.
Mm-hmm. Have you thought about just going directly to the Supreme Court? Because certainly that has been a strategy in other cases to say, hey, from what you said, I understand you're working this regionally, you're working through inferior courts, but have you considered going directly to the Supreme Court and say, hey, this is a very urgent issue, we're only 4 months out?
Right. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of our internal legal strategy contemplations. I will tell you we take this issue very seriously. And if we end up going to the Supreme Court, then you'll be the first to know.
We would love to be the first to know, Jenna. So do you believe then that ballot harvesting is unconstitutional?
So in that way, I think that ballot harvesting is definitely opening up a ripe opportunity for fraud. And ballot harvesting, if you define that as an unrelated third party that's not a caregiver or a custodian, in a way that is legally viable in the state, then yes, it shouldn't be something where one individual can go around to neighborhoods, can target, nursing homes, can target individuals and collect a lot of ballots on behalf of one party. That certainly would be unconstitutional, and that because it would negate the sanctity of the ballot and to protect and preserve the integrity of the ballot. And so when you look at that question of what is or isn't unconstitutional. The question really is, does this provide for this the election security that is warranted to advance free and fair elections? And so when you look at those types of contemplations, while there's not specific language in the Constitution of exactly how a vote has to be held, there are provisions and there are other rulings of the Supreme Court that have come out to talk about election security and the importance of that, and why our access to the franchise of voting is a constitutional guarantee for every individual who is eligible to vote. So we have to make sure that we are securing the sanctity of that ballot. And part of the right to vote is to make sure that my vote, your vote, is fairly and accurately counted. So when you undermine election security with allowing certain provisions that provide such a wide opportunity for fraud, then yes, that can be unconstitutional on that basis.
Mm-hmm. And you said the phrase, the sanctity of the ballot. I've heard a lot of progressives say that for them, they're really concerned about the sanctity of ballot access, and therefore making sure that everyone has access to be able to vote is also sacred as well. And for some folks who may be paranoid, or maybe they're nervous, or maybe they're not feeling well, maybe they feel like, or maybe their doctor is telling them, you shouldn't go in person. So what would you say to them, and what would you say to the response that, hey, isn't it sacred, the access to the ballot as well?
Well, so we have to define access to the ballot and also look at the data. There is nothing to say that not having a nationwide mail-in ballot system has prevented anyone from accessing the ballot when they want to vote. And so even in the midst of the coronavirus, again, even if someone doesn't necessarily feel like they want to go out, then they can request an absentee ballot. There are a number of states that provide a no excuse. You don't have to say why. You can request an absentee ballot, but that's one person verifying their identity, verifying their address, going through all of those safeguards, and having their ballot provided to them, not a nationwide mail-in ballot system that is the state sending millions and millions of ballots out into the ether. There's a difference, and the mainstream media wants to confuse this issue by saying that somehow just because they're not mailing everyone a ballot, then somehow that's foreclosing access. That's just simply not true. At some point, each individual registered voter needs to have personal responsibility to know when the election is. I mean, everyone knows November 3rd. And if you don't know when election day is, you can't then on November 5th say, oh, I didn't know, so therefore I want to vote late. There is always a deadline. And so in terms of requesting your ballot in advance, in terms of going through the steps of absentee, that's reasonable, that's rational. There's no data to suggest that anyone has been cut off from accessing their right of the franchise just because we don't have a nationwide mail-in system. And so the Democrats, again, they're trying to confuse the issue, and they're trying to create a problem where the data just does not show that there genuinely is one.
Personal responsibility, that's the key phrase that jumped out to me. Jenna Ellis, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
And thank you all for joining us here on Just the News. And thank you to our guest, Jenna Ellis, Senior Legal Advisor to the Trump 2020 campaign.